This is Bob Dylan's self-portrait. The gatefold and everything. Here he is with the chicken. And here he is music. Nature. Well, I avoided self-portrait for years because it's famously his worst record.
Well, it's the best Bob Dylan album. And the reason why it's the best Bob Dylan album is because it has nothing to do with music. And it has everything to do with literature, music, film, you name it. It's all there in one place. As soon as I heard All the Tired Horses, I knew that I was listening to something that was better than anything else I'd ever heard.
I like that first song, All the Pretty Horses or something. There's like another decent song in there too, and none of them are just like outright sucky, except the cover of the Paul Simon song, which is sort of inexplicable.
You know, he and Paul Simon had this weird rivalry where Simon always had this inferiority complex toward Dylan. So then, of course, Dylan does this cover song of Paul Simon's on the record, which I kind of like. It's one of the tracks I sort of like on the album. But
The Boxer, funny, but not one of my favorites. Mighty Quinn, also not one of my favorites. Something falls after Copper Kettle.
Half of the album, yeah.
You know, I'm not as into it. But
My first introduction to self-portrait was actually the single of Copper Kettle and Wigwam, which was in a cafe that I used to go to in the 80s, and I used to play Copper Kettle. My quarter in that cafe was Copper Kettle and something by Martin Denny. It was sort of it was a good combination, and I played it over and over again. So I wasn't going to buy self-portrait because it was so famously bad, but I was missing Copper Kettle, and I found it used, and it was originally like $8.98. This is a double record long, you know. It was originally $8.98, and it was marked down to $7.98, and then it was marked down to $6.98, and then it was marked down to $5.98, and then it was marked down to $4.98, which is when I bought it.
I'm very impressed by that. And you might notice it's the nice price plus.
Or minus, as it might.
Yeah, you would hope. Yeah. Look at that. Bob. Produced by Bob Johnson. Look at all these. Look at these tasty tracks. All the Tired Horses, brilliant. Alberta, I Forgot More Than You'll Ever Know. Days of 49 is genius. It's all about San Francisco. That's all right. Just keep on filming.
See, it was even more personal than that for me. I think part of Dylan's appeal at that time, I'm talking about his first 7 albums, which to me are like, almost like holy works, like this 7 books of the Torah, even though there were 5. You know, they really had that stature to me.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not kidding. I mean, like, in particular, from Bringing It All Back Home to Highway 61 Revisited to Blonde on Blonde. I guess those are the big 3.
He just said that it was considered a crushing disappointment, and quoted the AllMusic Guide. But the thing is, it's not like he went from Blonde on Blonde to self-portrait. No. There was a steady progression of becoming less genius-like.
I think it's interesting to think about like the context of it, because you know, he'd had this amazing run of creativity and fame in the mid-60s, and then it kind of seemed like he got burned out. He had his, what I think was a fake motorcycle accident. Like the first time he wanted people to leave him alone for a while and like try to deal with the fact that he was addicted to amphetamine or what have you. So he did that, and then as he was hiding out, the whole Summer of Love and Hippiedom came in, and Woodstock happened right next to him where he was staying, and he thought that was a bunch of bullshit and wrote the song $1 Million Bash, which is on the Basement Tapes, which is like a parody of Woodstock. So I think he saw the culture changing in ways he didn't like. He couldn't relate to it. And he stopped writing good songs. He kind of dried up, in my opinion. He had his first like real writer's block.
I, like no doubt a million other people, imagined that in somehow I was part of a select group who actually understood what he was saying, which was like very obscure and very difficult, at least it seemed to me. I think the appeal of Dylan in those early years was that he combined what seemed a genuine, honest political commitment, not dogmatic, you know, not crazy, commie, socialist claptrap, but the real stuff. He seemed to combine that kind of pure political thing, if you will, the Pete Seeger, Joan Baez, Woody Guthrie thing, with the beatnik, surrealist, Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg thing. So he had both the imagination to see the world as crazy as it was. I should say that it's probably no accident that I, like Dylan also, I imagine, were fooling around with hallucinogenic drugs at the time. Mm-hmm. And that a certain amount of his perceptions, particularly Gates of Eden, again, that those 3 late albums, seemed to be heavily influenced, to me anyway, by psychedelic drugs.
Because after Blonde on Blonde, Billy Harding, which is pretty brilliant, but switches the aesthetic to being much more straightforward, musically and to some extent lyrically, I'd say. It certainly doesn't have the rich, surreal imagery of Blonde on Blonde. So he's gone to making almost back to folk music. You know, it almost sounds like country music.
And he also, on top of it all, seemed to really be struggling with what it means to be an honest yet famous political person. In other words, you get all this fame, you get all this adulation, you immediately become part of what you've been attacking. He moved further from politics, and he put out those 2 albums that were sort of Johnny Cash-y and sort of moving towards quietism, John Wesley Harding and Nashville Skyline. And these albums just didn't live up to that. They were like sort of interesting experiments with difficult musical genres, but they didn't seem to be profoundly about anything.
You have all this going on. You had the Nashville Skyline album, which is a nice album, but it doesn't really compare to... It was the first, I think that was when people started whispering, well, like, this isn't really as good as what he used to do, and where are these great songs that he used to just, like, toss off?
Right. Then the album after that, I believe, is Nashville Skyline.
That's correct.
Which is country music, is straightforward, is a little bit banal. There's some Moon and June on that, I do believe. It's good, it's high quality, but very simple, very straightforward. There's nothing terribly, and I say this without really having listened to it, but I've heard some of it. And I'll guess the rest, and I bet I'm right, that it's not, that it is a much more straightforward and unexceptional record. Would you agree? Or it's got Lay Lady Lay, right? So Nashville Skyline should really have thrown people off the Dylan scent a little bit, except apparently it was a bigger selling record than any of his previous records, which is interesting. Nashville Skyline. And, God, none of us should really care so much about one guy.
Well, I'd say that first time I ever heard of Bob Dylan was We Are the World. I'm not even being ironic. It's really true. There was this guy, and it was supposed to be a really big deal, but he was part of the We Are the World like singing thing. And I was like, and his name was Bob Dylan. I'd never heard of him. And I knew everybody who was like, you know, Lionel Richie, I don't know, all these people. I knew everybody, but I did not know this guy. And then I heard him sing, and I thought, this guy's the worst singer I've ever heard, and I've never heard of him. And then I didn't think anything more about Bob Dylan for about 4 years. And then I saw a Tight Connection to My Heart or something like that video. Mm-hmm. And I immediately knew this guy had some acting talent.
And so apparently he he planned to do like this whole album of covers of traditional folk songs. And I think he really thought that was going to be like a self-portrait where he was going to say, this is where I'm really from, this is my roots, you know, this is who I am, this is the music that I love, and here I am, I'm going to do these covers. And that was his original idea, I think, and it really was going to be like this personal kind of album to tell people where he was coming from. And then for whatever reason, just his weird perverse humor there, or weird ideas that he's always had, he just decided to scrap that and to do this weird amalgamation of, you know, covers and bad live tracks and I don't know what all, and just throw it in there and turn it into something, and then have the ultimate joke and call it self-portrait, and put this cover painting on there that kind of looked like him and kind of wasn't. And
when Self-Portrait came out, I've never, I believe, even listened to the whole thing. I found it so almost degrading.
I never even sat down and listened to the whole thing. I didn't own it. I bought it for you, like, as a joke. I think I got you this in Blonde on Blonde, so you'd have what's supposed to be the best and the worst.
And I actually wanted to believe that, you know, he died and this was an imposter. It was that bad. Someone once talking about how Elvis had changed from somebody who once upon a time could play the blues into like this fat, overweight, drug-infested, sleazy lounge lizard, put out the thesis that, you know, the CIA had probably killed the real Elvis and loosed this other thing on the world. And I continue to believe that's not impossible.
It's not too different from Elvis. When Elvis started out, he was doing all these songs that were hits just a few years before. Mystery Train was a hit in like '54, and then he re-recorded it just a year or two later. And all of those early Elvis songs are like that. There were songs, Blue Suede Shoes had just been a hit. And Elvis kept on, I'll get back to Dylan, but Elvis kept on doing that. But things had changed by the 60s, so when he recorded Bridge Over Troubled Water, the feeling was, why the hell is he doing Bridge Over the Troubled Water? That's already been done. But he was probably still of the mindset that if you like a song, you play it. It's possible that Dylan was kind of in that space too. When it comes to like The Boxer, he probably genuinely liked that song. Heard that song by Paul Simon, thought this is a great song. Learned how to play it, because that's the kind of thing he did, and then sung it, enjoyed singing it, and thought this is good, so why not record it?
there's something he was trying to say. There's some kind of cutting, like, I think, mean, or, you know, to put that amongst this album that he began to see as this joke and self-parody and a kind of this work of contempt toward his audience in a way, to put the Paul Simon, you know, song in this context and then call the album Self-Portrait in this mocking way is like this subtle dig against Paul Simon, who I've always hated anyway. So I appreciate that. So I'm starting to think about the record that way, instead of just something that you sit there and listen to and enjoy. I don't think I can really do that.
And I thought, well, how bad can it be? And well, the funny thing about it is that I love Self-Portrait. I think it's a great record. After it does something. I hope you're going to edit this. In 1970, I don't think anybody wanted to hear this record, but having been through like the years of Bong Water and Pavement and every other kind of ramshackle performance possible, Self-Portrait is a record whose time has come. It's more haphazard than people who pride themselves on being haphazard. It's more indie than people who pride themselves on being indie, and that it was put out on a major label as a double disc by a prominent artist is just a shocking thing, and really incredibly innovative. I think that the songs that Dylan wrote are ridiculous for this record, but I really love them. And you know, I think you have to love All the Tired Horses. It's sublime, and Wigwam,
She Belongs to Me, of course. See, everything needs is an artist, he don't look bad. And then Wigwam, and then Alberta.
Yeah.
Looks good. Wow. Look at that. Hey, looks good, looks good.
Butter flavor.
Not bad.
I often muse about Wigwam, like which came first. Did Dylan sing na 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 and then make the horns play it? Or did the horns already play it and then Dylan sang along with it? Or did it somehow happen at the same time? I don't really know how that song was written, and so it's a little bit of a puzzle. But a lot of the record's a bit of a puzzle. The cover of Early Morning Rain is actually my favorite version of that song, and I own Gordon Lightfoot's version and Ian and Sylvia's version. I think he does it great. I think all the country songs are really good, but there's something about the record that's just very, very special in that it's. So every time it almost gets good, something happens to make it really terrible. But it all fits together in a way that I think is fascinating. I don't know if this is interesting.
It seems such a colossal lack of taste in someone who may have had a lot of arrogance and a lot of pretentiousness at times, but did not lack in basic taste. Into musical taste, lyrical sensibility, and suddenly, Moby Grape could have produced. Lawrence Welk could have produced that. It just seemed like a bunch of shit that I wanted to believe, that he was like on drugs or in prison somewhere, and his producer was producing this just to milk the money.
Also, I seriously think that he was probably high. Probably just marijuana. Marijuana will make you think that mediocre things are great. I spent an entire afternoon when I was a teenager stoned listening to a Simple Minds song over and over thinking it was a great song. It's not. I know that now. But, drugs will do bad things to your head. Primarily make you think that mediocre music is good. So I think that is part of the problem with Self-Portrait. Probably there was a lot of good grass in New York State at the time. But he probably thought that the record was good, and I think Self-Portrait, that it was supposed to be a really great record. It's supposed to encompass all that is Dylan. It's got originals, it's got him playing the songs he's already famous for, but supposedly the definitive now live version even better, and songs that he thinks are great songs that he's recording. So it's meant to be a great record. That it isn't is testament just that he was a human being. And, not everything that came through his fingers was genius. And maybe that's why it's disliked so much, is because there was a feeling in 1965 and 1966 that he was more than a man, that everything that came out of Bob Dylan was genius and was a kind of prophet-like distillation of what was happening. But Self-Portrait makes it clear that he's a song and dance man, as he used to refer to himself, and people thought he was joking, but I don't think he was. I think he just played music, and not all of it was good.
I completely wrote the dude off for 20 years.
20 years.
I figured that, he'd been this great 20-year-old guy. And he realized if Self-Portrait came out in 70, I was 23 at that time. So Dylan's, maybe 5-year period of tremendous creativity corresponded to the time that I was 18 to 23. Extraordinarily formative years in an extraordinarily tumultuous American society. We're talking about 65 to 70, everything was happening. And his sensibility informed mine, really explained the world to me in a certain way. And so it was a massive defection for me, and a massive loss to lose him and for him to go into all this other junk.
And you assume that it's genius and that it's thought out. No, he's just going for it,
Yeah.
And some of it is great. A lot of it is. And the feel of it, I think he's instrumental in, you know, bringing rock and roll out of it being rock and roll and bringing it into... Actually, he's to blame for almost everything terrible that happened afterwards. I don't know, again, we shouldn't even really be bothering with this. We should be like out walking dogs or something.
Mostly they quote your buddy Grill Marcus. What is this shit?
Did this what he said?
That this is apparently Grill Marcus's Rolling Stone review. This shit.
What a small man.
There was a famous Rolling Stone review at the time, and the first sentence in the review was just, "What is this shit?" Which I think was Grill Marcus or so. That was kind of my feeling as well. But now I've come to see it. I don't think about it as a record. I just think about it as a concept or as a statement.
No, I think it's a lot more than that. It has to do with the search for identity in the 60s and the fact that this was a decade that was premised on the idea that if you pushed and pushed and pushed, you became more authentic. And as we see 30 some odd years later, how false that was, Dylan was the first person to figure that out. That it can't be this search for radical subjectivity, because there is no radical subjectivity. All you're trying to do is to be a conformist at age 28 is to be a radical. And he was already projecting forward that when you're 50, you know, being a conformist will be sitting around doing the Boxer covers. Thank you.
And then one day I was listening to a radio, and I believe it was around 91, living in Portland, and someone reviewed the album, which I believe is called Good As I've Been to You. And what was striking about that album is that Dylan, with his acoustic guitar and nothing else, although probably lots of engineering in the studio, did 12 or 13 songs that he hadn't written. And he did 12 or 13 traditional folk songs and other songs, and kind of put his heart into them. And to me it was like a turnaround, where he was like saying, playing good music as well as I can really matters, and stopping being such an egotistical guy that thinks that every word comes out of his mouth is genius, and instead doing other people's stuff and doing it well.
It is not a great record. It has probably become much more than it ever should have been, because people disliked it so much for reasons that really had little to do with the record itself. I think they were upset that the 60s were over, and they blamed it on Self-Portrait. Self-Portrait did not kill the 60s. Probably like Sears. I bet Sears killed the 60s.
Yeah.
I bet like they just started making paisley couches, and that was it. It's over.
Between John Wesley Harding and Blood on the Tracks comes this interesting period where
I want to read that.
he wasn't hitting on his full cylinders, and he was being perverse. And in terms of being perverse, I think this and the Dylan record, which is all covers, have got to be the peak of perverseness.
I bet he wasn't thinking that far. I think in general, he's not thinking that far. I think he's a far more intuitive and normal guy than people think Bob Dylan is, because if you listen to a lot of lyrics, he's just rhyming shit together, and it sounds good. I remember most of these songs.
Why don't you pop it in?
No. There's no need.
I think it may be the greatest album, not just the greatest Bob Dylan album. It could potentially be the greatest album ever made.
If Self-Portrait were Dylan's only record, I don't think I would be going to see him next week.
Yeah. The website.
But no, I went to this, like, I stumbled